In 1975, a group of municipal officials, fire marshals, and insurance industry lobbyists met in suburban Chicago to finalize a document called the Basic Building Code, the BOCA Code. Within a decade, almost every major American city had adopted some version of it. Within 2 decades, the model codes had absorbed every regional variation in the country. Today, those codes run more than 1,000 pages, regulate the size of every nail, the spacing of every stud, the angle of every roof rafter, and they have one quiet effect that almost nobody talks about. Your great-grandfather's house, the one your family lived in for 4 generations, the one that survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the 1925 tri-state tornado, would not pass inspection today. It would be condemned. The skills he used to build it have been declared illegal in nearly every American jurisdiction. Number 9 on this list is the technique that has held up barns in the Pennsylvania countryside for 250 years and would now be flagged by an inspector inside of an hour. Number 13 was the standard insulation method used in every farmhouse in the Midwest from 1880 to 1950, and a homeowner who installs it in 2024 faces a fine of up to $5,000 per volt violation. And number 1, the foundation principle that connected every method on this list, has been so completely erased from American construction that most contractors under the age of 50 have never even heard the term. These 14 skills built the country: frame houses, log houses, sod houses, stone houses, post and beam barns, dugouts, sheds, smokehouses, root cellars, spring houses, and hand pump wells. Every one of them stood up to weather, time, and the people inside them, often for centuries, often with no power tools, no engineered lumber, and no permits. Today, they would all fail inspection, and the men who knew how to build them are mostly buried beside the structures they put up. Before we start, hit subscribe. What you are about to learn is not a how-to. It is a record of what was possible when ordinary men still owned the knowledge of how to put a roof over their families' heads without asking permission from anybody. Let us count them down. Number 14, hand-hewn timber framing. Your great-grandfather did not buy lumber at a yard. He felled the tree, dragged it home with a horse or a mule, and squared the log with a broadaxe and an adze. A skilled hewer could turn a 30-foot oak log into a 12 by 12 squared timber in about 6 hours of work. The squared timber was structurally stronger than any sawn lumber of the same dimensions because the grain ran continuously from end to end. There were no finger joints, no glue lines, no weak points. The timbers were then jointed using mortise and tenon connections, cut by hand with a mallet and chisel, locked together with hardwood pegs. No nails, no screws, no metal connectors. The technique built barns in Pennsylvania that have stood for 250 years, churches in New England that have held up against 3 centuries of nor'easters, and farmhouses across the Midwest that survived tornadoes that flattened modern stick frame homes nearby. Today, hand-hewn timber framing is regulated as a specialty engineered system in nearly every American jurisdiction. The timber must be stamped, graded by a licensed inspector, and certified for structural use. A homeowner who fells a tree on his own land, hews it square in his backyard, and uses it to build an addition to his house is committing a code violation. That can result in a stop work order, a teardown order, and fines that scale with the assessed value of the property. The skill is not gone. It is illegal. Number 13, plank and sawdust insulation. Before fiberglass, before foam, before mineral wool, your great-grandmother packed the walls of her farmhouse with the only insulation that was free, abundant, and effective: sawdust. The wall cavity was framed with rough sawn studs, sheathed with planks on both sides, and the cavity in between was filled, layer by layer, with sawdust collected from the local sawmill. A 2x4 wall packed with sawdust delivered an R value of approximately R2.5 per inch, comparable to lower-grade fiberglass. The technique was used in nearly every farmhouse in the upper Midwest from approximately 1880 to 1950. The walls breathed. They never molded the way modern walls do, because there was no vapor barrier trapping moisture. They were also fire-resistant in a way that surprised people, because tightly packed sawdust starves a fire of oxygen. Modern building codes prohibit sawdust as a wall cavity material, in nearly every American jurisdiction. The justification is fire safety, despite documented evidence that the historical fire loss rate in sawdust-insulated homes was lower than the fire loss rate in modern fiberglass and vapor barrier construction during the same period. The cost differential is staggering. A 1,500 square foot farmhouse insulated with sawdust in 1925 cost effectively zero in materials, with the sawdust given away free by the local mill. A 1,500 square foot home insulated with modern code, compliant fiberglass, and air sealing in 2024 costs approximately $8,000 in materials and labor. The fines for installing sawdust today can reach $5,000 per volt violation, and the building inspector will require the wall to be opened up and re-insulated to code at the homeowner's expense. Number 12. The dry stacked stone foundation. Your great-grandfather did not pour a concrete foundation. He found the right stones in the field, dressed them roughly with a chisel, and stacked them dry, without mortar, in a trench dug below the frost line. The stones interlocked under the weight of the structure above them. Pressure made the foundation tighter, not looser. Frost heaved them slightly, and they settled back into place every spring. A dry stacked stone foundation built in 1860 is still under barns across rural America, holding up structures that weigh many tons. The technique requires no concrete, no rebar, no permit, no engineering report, and no truck delivered material. The skill required is in the eye for which stones fit together, a knowledge passed from father to son across generations of stonework. Modern building codes require all foundations to be poured concrete or concrete masonry units engineered to specific load tolerances, with rebar placed at specified intervals and inspected at multiple stages. Dry stacked stone is not permitted as a primary foundation in any American building jurisdiction. A homeowner who attempts to set a small outbuilding on a dry stacked stone foundation faces a stop work order, a teardown requirement, and the requirement to replace the entire foundation with code-compliant concrete at his own expense. The barns in Lancaster County still stand on theirs. Number 11. The wattle and daub wall. Before drywall, before plaster, before cement board, the standard wall fill across colonial America and well into the 19th century was wattle and daub. A lattice of woven flexible saplings, called wattle, was nailed between the studs, then plastered on both sides with a mixture of clay, straw, sand, and animal hair, called daub. The mixture cured to a hard, breathable, fireproof finish that lasted for centuries. The walls of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, completed in 1753, were built using a variation of wattle and daub. The walls of thousands of farmhouses across Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Maryland were built the same way. The technique uses materials that cost effectively nothing: clay from the riverbank, straw from the threshing floor, hair from the local barber, or the spring sheep shearing. It produces a wall that is fire-resistant, breathable, soundproof, and nearly indestructible by anything short of demolition. Modern building codes do not recognize wattle and daub as a permissible interior wall finish. A homeowner who replaces a section of drywall with wattle and daub in a code jurisdiction is creating an unpermitted modification that, if discovered during a sale or insurance inspection, must be removed and replaced with code-compliant material at the homeowner's expense. First, pattern break. The 1975 Boca Code did not appear out of nowhere. It was the culmination of a 50-year project by the building industry, the insurance industry, and the labor unions to centralize control over American construction and eliminate the regional variation that had defined the country's housing for 200 years. Before 1925, building codes in the United States were locally written, locally enforced, and varied dramatically from one town to the next. A house built in rural Vermont was constructed differently from a house built in coastal South Carolina because the climates, the materials, and the centuries-old local knowledge differed. The federal government did not regulate residential construction at all. Then, a series of urban fires, most notably the 1903 Iroquois Theater Fire in Chicago and the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in New York, gave the insurance industry the political opening it needed. The first model building code, the National Board of Fire Underwriters Code, was published in 1905. It was followed by the Uniform Building Code in 1927, the Southern Standard Building Code in 1945, and the Boca Basic Building Code in 1950. By 1975, when the major model codes were standardized into substantially uniform documents, almost every American jurisdiction had abandoned its local building tradition and adopted some version of a model code. The model codes did three things. They standardized construction practices in ways that favored the major industrial materials suppliers: the lumber industry, the cement industry, the gypsum drywall industry, the fiberglass insulation industry. They standardized labor practices in ways that favored the trade unions, whose members were trained in the new methods, and they declared illegal nearly every traditional building technique that did not fit the new framework. Your great-grandfather's house was not unsafe. It was uncertifiable. The two are very different things. An uncertifiable house can stand for 250 years. The new homes built to current code may not last 50. Number 10. The cob house. Cob is a mixture of clay subsoil, straw, and water, kneaded by foot until it reaches the consistency of stiff dough, then formed into walls course by course over a stone foundation. The technique is one of the oldest in the world, used continuously across England, Wales, and Ireland from the 11th century to the early 20th century. Cob walls are 18 to 24 inches thick. They are fireproof, soundproof, breathable, thermally massive, and produce interiors that hold a stable temperature with minimal heating in winter and minimal cooling in summer. Cob houses built in Devon, England, in the 14th century are still occupied today. A cob house in Oregon, built in 1996, was tested by the Oregon Department of Geology and found to perform at 3 times the seismic safety level required by modern code. Despite this, cob is not a permitted residential construction method in any American building jurisdiction. The reason given is the absence of standardized engineering data. Despite the fact that the existing data from England and from independent American testing demonstrates structural performance superior to most code-compliant residential framing. A homeowner who builds a cob house without a permit faces a teardown order in nearly every American county. A homeowner who attempts to permit a cob house faces a permitting process that can take years, requires custom engineering reports costing tens of thousands of dollars, and is more often than not denied at the discretion of the local building official. Number 9. The post and beam barn raising. Your great-grandfather did not contract out the construction of his barn. He cut the timbers in the winter, hewed, and joined them through the spring, and on a single Saturday in early summer, the entire community gathered at his farm and raised the frame of the barn in a single day. A 30 by 50 foot bank barn could be framed, raised, and decked between sunrise and sunset by a crew of 30 to 60 men, working with hand tools and ropes and a few sets of pulleys. The men who came to raise your great-grandfather's barn knew that he would come to raise theirs. There was no money exchanged. The exchange was labor for labor, debt-free, across an entire generation of farms. The technique built more than 100,000 barns in Pennsylvania alone, in a state that today has fewer than 10,000 working barns standing. Almost none of the surviving barns could be replicated under current building code. The labor itself would now be classified as unlicensed construction. The participants would be required to be licensed contractors, OSHA-trained, insured, and operating under a permit. The barn-raising tradition, which built much of rural America, has been declared illegal in everything but rare exemption. The community that organized itself around it has been broken at the joint where it met the building code. Number 8. The wood shake roof. Before asphalt shingles, before metal panels, before clay tile, your great-grandfather's roof was made of wooden shakes, split by hand from straight-grain logs of cedar, cypress, or white oak. The shakes were thicker at one end than the other, overlapped each other in long courses up the roof, and were fastened with hand-forged nails. A wood shake roof, properly installed, lasted 60 to 80 years. The shakes shed water by their own grain pattern. They expanded and contracted with the weather without leaking. They could be replaced individually as they failed, without disturbing the rest of the roof. The cost in 1900 was the cost of the labor of one man with a froe and a maul, splitting shakes from a few logs hauled out of the woodlot. Modern building codes regulate wood-shake roofs intensively. They are prohibited outright in nearly every fire risk jurisdiction in the western United States. In jurisdictions where they are permitted, the shakes must be treated with fire-retardant chemicals, manufactured at a permitted mill, sold under a building code certification, and installed with code-compliant underlayment and fasteners. The materials cost has gone from effectively zero to roughly 5 times the cost of asphalt shingles. The skill of splitting shakes by hand has so completely disappeared from American construction that the few remaining specialists charge several $100s per sequare for hand-split material that the average farm boy in 1900 produced as a routine winter chore. Second, pattern break. In 1958, a homeowner in central Indiana poured a concrete slab and built a small 2-story addition onto the back of his farmhouse. He used materials he had on hand, methods he had learned from his father, and a level of skill that produced a structure plumb and square within 1/4 of an inch. He did not pull a permit because the township did not yet require one for owner. Built additions on agricultural property. The addition stood unmodified until the homeowner's grandson sold the property in 2019. At the closing, the buyer's home inspector flagged the addition as an unpermitted modification. The county records office had no permit on file because no permit had ever been required at the time of construction. The buyer's mortgage lender refused to close the loan until the addition was either permitted retroactively or demolished. The retroactive permitting process required structural engineering calculations costing $4,200, the opening of multiple walls to expose framing for inspection, the replacement of the existing electrical and plumbing to current code, and the assessment of approximately $11,000 in additional fees and permit costs. The total cost to bring the 1958 addition into compliance with 2019 code was just over $38,000. The family chose to demolish it instead. The addition came down in 3 days. The space where it had stood is now a concrete pad. The story is not unusual. Across rural America, the structures your grandparents built with their own hands are coming down because they cannot be sold without retroactive code compliance. And the cost of compliance routinely exceeds the cost of demolition. The building code did not require these structures to come down. It made them economically impossible to keep. The effect is identical. The history is being erased structure by structure, sale by sale, county by county, and almost nobody is keeping count. Number 7, the root cellar. Before refrigeration, before the chest freezer, your great-grandmother stored her family's winter food in a root cellar dug into the earth behind the house. The cellar was typically 8 feet deep, with stone or brick walls, an arched ceiling of either masonry or thick timbers covered with earth, and a single ventilation shaft that ran from the ceiling up through the soil to a small hooded opening above ground. The temperature inside a properly constructed root cellar held steady at 35 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Regardless of the temperature outside, the humidity stayed in the high range that root vegetables require to remain firm and prevent shrinkage. Apples, potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, cabbages, and onions stored in a root cellar from October could last through to the following May without spoilage. The cellar required no electricity, no maintenance beyond annual cleaning, and no replacement of components. A well-built root cellar lasted as long as the house above it. Modern building codes treat below-grade structures of this type as occupied basement space, which means they must meet egress requirements, ventilation requirements, electrical service requirements, and waterproofing standards. A root cellar built to modern code costs approximately $15,000 to $25,000 to construct. A root cellar built in 1900 cost the labor of one man with a shovel and the cost of a few cubic yards of stone or brick scavenged from a teardown. The skill of building a functioning root cellar without engineering or modern materials has almost entirely vanished. The few remaining masons who can do the work are mostly Amish, and most of them will not work in jurisdictions that require permits. Number 6, the spring house. Your great-grandfather did not have running water in the form a modern American would recognize. He had something better, a small stone or brick structure built directly over a natural spring on his property, with a stone trough running through it to channel the water, and shelves above the trough where butter, milk, cheese, cheese, eggs, and meat were placed in ceramic crocks to be cooled by the constant flow of 50-degree water passing beneath them. A spring house was a refrigerator, a water source, a butter cooler, and a milk separator combined, requiring no electricity, no mechanical parts, and no maintenance beyond keeping the structure clean. It was the single most important outbuilding on a working farm in the 19th and early 20th century. Modern building codes regulate any structure that handles or modifies surface water. A spring house built today triggers permitting requirements under both building codes and environmental protection regulations. The owner must obtain a water rights permit, a structural permit, sometimes a wetland disturbance permit, and depending on the jurisdiction, an additional permit for any food storage that occurs inside the structure. The combined permitting cost regularly exceeds the construction cost. The skill of sitting and building a spring house, which involved reading the land for the spring, dressing the stone, and building the channels and shelves, has so completely disappeared from American practice that most rural families with active springs on their property allow them to flow uncaptured into the woods rather than navigate the permitting system to use them. Number 5. The smokehouse. Your great-grandmother did not buy bacon at the grocery store. She salted, brined, and smoked her own pork in a small wooden or stone smokehouse on the property. The structure was typically 8 feet square, built of fitted timbers or stone, with a small fire pit at the center and racks above it for hanging meat. The smoke from a smoldering hardwood fire, typically hickory, apple, or oak, cured the meat over a period of 3 to 10 days, producing bacon, ham, and salt pork that kept for 6 months to a year without refrigeration. A single hog could produce enough cured meat to feed a family of 6 for an entire winter. The technique was used continuously across rural America from the colonial period through the 1950s. It is now nearly extinct. Modern food safety regulations classify home meat curing as a high-risk food activity. Many states require a licensed meat processing facility, USDA inspection, and commercial-grade equipment for any meat that will be consumed by anyone outside the immediate family. Building a traditional smokehouse on residential property triggers building permit requirements, zoning review for outbuildings, and in many jurisdictions, fire department review. The combined permitting cost easily exceeds the cost of buying a year's worth of bacon at the grocery store. The structure that was the centerpiece of every working farm in 1900 has become an act of regulatory defiance in 2024. Third pattern break. The economics of the modern building code are not what they appear to be. The code is not a neutral set of safety standards developed by disinterested engineers. It is a document negotiated by the industries that profit from its requirements. The cement industry has full-time lobbyists at the International Code Council, the body that publishes the model codes most American jurisdictions adopt. The lumber industry has lobbyists. The gypsum drywall industry has lobbyists. The fiberglass insulation industry has lobbyists. The electrical equipment industry has lobbyists. The plumbing fixture industry has lobbyists. Every revision of the code is fought over, line by line, by the industries that stand to benefit from the new requirements. The result is a document that mandates the use of products manufactured by exactly those industries in quantities and configurations that maximize their sales. A modern code-compliant, 2,000 square foot single-family home requires approximately 14,000 board feet of dimensional lumber, 7,000 square feet of drywall, 5,000 square feet of fiberglass insulation, 3,000 pounds of cement, 1,500 feet of copper or PEX piping, and 1,800 feet of electrical wiring. The materials cost alone is approximately $75,000 in 2024. None of this is required by safety. A house built with hand-hewn timbers, sawdust insulation, dry stacked stone, and wattle and daub fill of the same square footage would cost under $5,000 in materials and would last longer than any code-compliant home built in the past 50 years. The difference of $70,000 per house multiplied across the roughly 1.5 million new homes built in America each year is approximately $100 billion in mandatory annual revenue for the building materials industry, secured by code, enforced by inspection, and unavoidable for any homeowner who wishes to legally inhabit a structure. The code is not safety. It is a subsidy. It has been for 50 years. Number 4. The bank barn. The bank barn is a 2-level barn built into the side of a hill, with the lower level used for livestock and the upper level for hay storage and threshing. The hill itself serves as the ramp to the upper level, allowing wagons loaded with hay to be driven directly to the haymow without any mechanical lifting. The lower level, sheltered against the hillside, stays cool in summer and warm in winter, providing optimal conditions for livestock without any heating or cooling input. The bank barn is the most efficient agricultural structure ever developed in North America. It requires no power equipment to operate, no fuel inputs, and produces working conditions that improve animal health and reduce farm labor. The technique was used continuously across the eastern United States from approximately 1730 to 1950. Modern agricultural building codes do not prohibit bank barns outright, but they impose requirements that make them economically impossible to construct. The grading and excavation work required to set the lower level into the hillside triggers stormwater management permits, soil erosion permits, and in many jurisdictions, environmental review for slope disturbance. The structural connection between the earth, bermed lower level, and the timber-framed upper structure requires custom engineering that cannot be done from standard plans. The combined permitting and engineering cost for a new bank barn typically exceeds $50,000 before construction begins. The skill of sitting a bank barn against the natural slope, of building the stone retaining walls that hold the hillside in place, of timber framing the upper structure to bear the weight of stored hay, has been allowed to die in nearly every American county. The bank barns that still stand are mostly over 100 years old, and when they fail, they are not being replaced. Number 3. The hand-dug well. Before drilled wells, before well pumps, before submersible electric motors, your great-grandfather dug his own well by hand. The work was done with a shovel, a bucket, and a rope. A team of 2 men could dig a 30-foot well in approximately a week, working through the soil and into the water-bearing layer beneath. The well was lined with stone or brick laid in a circular pattern. As the digging progressed, a windlass with a rope and bucket was set over the wellhead, and the family drew water from it for as long as the house stood. A hand-dug well, properly sited and constructed, lasted indefinitely. The water quality was generally excellent because the well drew from a shallow groundwater source filtered through the surrounding soil. The well required no electricity, no replacement parts, and no annual maintenance contracts. Modern well regulations require licensed well drillers, drilled wells of specific minimum depths, water quality testing, and approved well casings. Hand-dug wells are not permitted as new water sources in nearly any American jurisdiction. Existing hand-dug wells are typically grandfathered in, but any modification or repair triggers a requirement to replace the well with a code-compliant drilled well at the homeowner's expense. The cost of a new code-compliant drilled well in 2024 is approximately $8,000 to $25,000, depending on the jurisdiction and the depth required. The hand-dug well that served your great-grandfather's family for a century is, in 2024, both technically illegal as a new construction and economically impossible to replace with a like for like. Number 2. The unpermitted owner-built home. The single most consequential change in American residential construction over the past 50 years has not been any specific code requirement. It has been the elimination of the owner-builder. Until approximately 1970, a homeowner in most American jurisdictions could build his own house on his own property using his own labor without obtaining a building permit, without contracting out the work to licensed trades, and without submitting plans for approval. He could build it the way his father had taught him, using the materials that were available to him locally, at his own pace, on his own schedule. The result was an enormous variety of vernacular American architecture: Cape Cod cottages in Maine, sod houses in Nebraska, log cabins in Appalachia, adobe homes in New Mexico, plank houses in the Pacific Northwest. Each region developed building methods adapted to its climate, its materials, and its traditions. Today, the owner-builder is functionally extinct in nearly every American jurisdiction. The major exceptions are a handful of rural counties in states like Vermont, Maine, and parts of the Mountain West, where some unincorporated areas still permit owner-builder construction with minimal oversight. Everywhere else, a homeowner who attempts to build his own house faces the same regulatory burden as a commercial developer. Permits, plans, engineering, inspections, and licensed trade requirements that effectively require him to hire out the work. The ability of an ordinary American to build a place to live for his family with his own hands has been quietly extinguished. Almost nobody under the age of 50 even realizes it was once possible. Number 1. The principle of human, scaled construction. This is not a skill. It is the principle that governed every method on this list. Your great-grandfather's buildings were built by hand, at human scale, with materials that came from within walking distance, using tools that could be carried by one man, by people who lived in the structures they built, and who answered to nobody but themselves and their own families. The buildings reflected this. The proportions were human. The detailing was personal. The choices about where to put a window, how to angle a roof, how to lay a stone, were made by the man whose family would live with those choices for the next century. The buildings had souls. Anyone who has stood inside an old farmhouse, a centuries-old barn, a colonial church, knows what this means. The buildings feel different from modern construction in a way that is almost impossible to describe, but absolutely impossible to ignore. The modern building code has eliminated this. Every new home in America is built to a standardized specification by interchangeable crews of licensed tradesmen from manufactured materials shipped from elsewhere on a schedule dictated by the developer's financing terms, in proportions and details determined by software that prioritizes efficiency of construction over the human experience of inhabiting the result. The houses are technically safe. They are also, in the most fundamental sense, soulless. They are products. Your great-grandfather did not produce a house. He built one. The two are not the same activity. The skills on this list, hand-hewn timbers, dry-stacked stone, wattle, and daub, wood-shake roofs, root cellars, spring houses, smokehouses, hand-dug wells, were not techniques. They were expressions of a relationship between a man, a piece of land, and the family that would live on it. The relationship has been replaced. The land has been replaced by a parcel. The family has been replaced by a buyer. The man has been replaced by a contractor. The result is a country full of houses that nobody loves, that nobody can repair, that will not last 50 years, that cost more in inflation-adjusted dollars than the houses they replaced, and that have been declared the only legal option in nearly every jurisdiction in the country. None of this happened by accident. It happened because the industries that profit from the modern code and the local officials who enforce it and the lenders who finance it all wanted it to happen. Your great-grandfather had something they did not want anybody else to have. He had a house that he built himself, on land he owned outright, using skills passed down from his own father. That kind of independence is a problem for an industrial economy. So they wrote a code, and they enforced it, and they made it illegal for anyone else to do what he did. Here is your challenge. This week, walk around your own home. Look at it carefully. Ask yourself which parts of it could be repaired by someone you know personally. Ask yourself which materials you could replace if you had to. Ask yourself how many of the choices about how it was built were made by anyone you have ever met. Then, go find an old building near you, a 19th century barn, a colonial farmhouse, an old stone spring house, a hand-dug well. Stand inside it for a few minutes. Notice how it feels. Notice how the proportions sit. Notice how the materials sound under your hand. The men who built that structure are gone. The skills that built it are mostly gone. But the structure is still there, telling you everything you need to know about what was lost and why it mattered. Tell me in the comments which old building you found. Tell me what your family used to build with. Tell me if anybody in your family tree still knew any of these skills before they died. The history is not gone. It is hiding in the structures that have not yet been condemned. Time to go look at them.